Welcome back to the Rising Podcast. I'm Xavier, and you're joined here with Kabria and Kamen. Black person of the day.
Of course, let me go first. You feel
Welcome back to the Rising Podcast. Today we are joined here with Kabria and Kamen, and as you may notice, we do have a special guest. So Kamen, why don't you go ahead and take the reins and give us a little bit more background.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest in the building. Very, very, very special guest. Pastor Stuart Welch, my father. How are you today, sir?
I love that introduction. I love that. I'm doing well. Thank you. And glad to be with y'all.
Well, thank you for coming
today.
Yeah, we've been, I've been really thinking about this for a long time, just trying to get you on this platform, kind of talk about, you have many skills. You're not only a pastor, you're a coach. You've experienced a lot in your 60 years. So I definitely wanted to just have a conversation with the next generation as we start. This is our first interview on the Rising, so thank you for joining us.
Wow.
Thank you for being our
first
ever. Yes, our first ever.
Oh man,
guest on the Rising.
Yeah, that's big time. I done hit the big time.
Yeah,
right.
So you recently came back from an African American Heritage Conference in San Antonio. So how was your trip?
Yeah, that's a tremendous conference. It's called the African Heritage Network. Which is a division of the Free Methodist Church. And, it's a gathering of black leaders in the Free Methodist denomination that come together to provide support, encouragement, and resources to other black pastors. We're fortunate to be involved in a church, a denomination founded in 1860. And we just, last July 2023, elected the first black bishop, Bishop Kenny Martin out of San Bernardino.
nice.
164-year history of the church, and we now have an African-American bishop. So praise the Lord for that, what God is doing in the midst of the church, and we're glad to be a part of what's going on.
Yeah. Before I hand it over to these guys for some questions, I kind of just wanted to ask you kind of the role of the church. Like me, I'm growing up. I've been in church all my life. I don't know nothing else but church. But, getting older and starting to realize that that's not the case for everybody. They have a different kind of pathway to Christ, even if they are getting to Christ at this age. So how would you describe the historical role of the church in building and shaping communities, black communities, but mostly just in communities in general, and how has that changed and evolved over time?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the role of the church as we see it through the gospel may not be the role of the church as we see it in America. We are very skewed because our perspectives are based on the Western world, and we base a lot on the American concept of church. And so when you look at the church all over the world, then you get the real sense of what church is. Many people will think that you go to church, that's that 90 minutes inside that box on a Sunday,
right.
And that's not the church.
Right.
The church is us living life together. The church is us being one body. It's being one family. It's making sure that we have the resources that every person needs. So, Dr. King would say, if one is suffering, then we're all suffering. And that's the purpose of the church. To bring people into community with Christ. So when I grew up, same way when you grew up, the church is there. It's funny because you remember one time a friend called me on the phone and he was saying, as pastors, all we want is money. We want to raise all these big offerings. And I was glad to have you in the car because I said, yeah, how do you answer that? And you said, yeah, well, I couldn't get those shoes, or we couldn't eat that meal because I'm cleaning out our pantry to take food to somebody else's house, or I'm buying someone else's kid's shoes and you got to get regular shoes. So the role of the church is to share the love of Jesus Christ And that means that everyone is valued and everyone belongs in a community. So that's 7 days a week.
Right.
That's not church just on Sunday.
Right.
And it's great to hear that the purpose of the church should be much more involved than what people will give it credit for. But based off of your understanding of church, the structure of church may not be as linear as we think based on demographic or community, but the main purpose and function of church as a whole should still follow the guidelines and principles of what Christianity should be as a whole. So as it pertains to the black community, what do you see the role of church being for black people?
Well, it's really along those same lines, because a couple Saturdays ago, and Cayman was there when I had the opportunity to speak at my friend's pastoral installation, and his grandmother was there, 92 years old. And I recall, she lives in Del Paso Heights, right behind Grant High School. And I recall the first time I met her, we went over to her house, door was unlocked, we walked in, she hugged me just like I was her grandson. And then she told me, you know what, you don't need him to come back over here. And that's the nature of community right there. Right. Is that once we have this common thread, for us in the church, it's Christ. Once we have this common thread, there are no more dividers and there's no more separators. And that's what it's about. So everyone is welcome. And so when you say that, the way that we grew up, the reason we were in church 7 days a week was because the church had what we needed. So we got tutored at the church. We got help with our schoolwork at the church. We got meals at the church. We got education in so many different areas. Of course, we already had sports. We were fortunate to have a pastor who was a AAA baseball player when he got drafted into the ministry, and he left a lucrative career in baseball to the call to be a pastor. So to be young black boys growing up with a guy who had track records at Mississippi Valley State, that was incredible. Cayman's grandfather, my dad, was a Hall of Fame player, both football, baseball, basketball, growing up in segregated times. So to be involved in a community where everyone from all these areas came together as one family, that's why when we say, hey, that's your cousin. So, I'm calling Cayman because, our cousin just gets the general manager position with the Chicago Bears. So I'm saying, hey, your cousin just got the job. We're excited, blah, blah, blah. Well, they're our cousins because we all grew up together. Right. And so there's one common string. So we're not blood related, but we all lived our lives together. And that's the church.
By the way, Ryan Poles, he's got a lot of decisions to make in this upcoming draft. Yeah, we're praying for him because Chicago Bears haven't been the best. So now he's taking over something, and
he's going to do his thing.
Right, he's going to do his thing. We believe in him.
Wow. So thank you so much for just explaining the role of the church and the community. And so my question would be, based on what you just explained, how would you say the role of the church is today, and how are you guys outreaching to young people to make sure those communities and those resources, are still
well,
here today?
We do. We live in such a different time, and it's harder now than it was before because we didn't have the proliferation of information that we have now.
Okay.
So, the things that the church has to offer, you can now get on Google. You can find online. You can go anywhere. But there's still a reason the Surgeon General has declared loneliness as an epidemic in America. And there's a reason for that, because we're the most connected that we have ever been in the history of mankind, and we are the loneliest that we've ever been in the history of mankind. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is what we would consider, people would say, the impotence of the church and the church's inability to connect people. And so when you begin to, it's really complex, but it's actually pretty simple too. And we're searching for things, unfortunately, that bring us personal pleasure and satisfaction, when in times past it was about the community and it was about what did us well. So if it didn't do us well, then there was more work to be done. And now everything points to self and I and me, and every other thing that you look at that wants to lift me up to make me feel better is always going to lead to an empty life.
So with those distractions until like you said a couple weeks ago, I heard you speak at the ordination. And I even wrote down in my notes, I'm like, okay, my dad is cooking right now. I was like, my dad is cooking. And you said, as pastors, we have a responsibility to allow people to live with a biblical worldview. So with all the distractions going on, how do you take like new and innovative approaches to kind of get that word out of there, still maintain that biblical worldview in this now time of 2024?
Well, I think it's interesting because people would think in 2024 as if God hasn't had a new idea. Everything comes from an idea. Everything comes from a thought. Well, every thought and idea comes from God. So when you look back on it, do you think Moses or Abraham couldn't fly an airplane? Of course they could. You think they couldn't have made a rocket in aeronautics? Of course they could. Because it all comes from God.
Right.
He gives to both the fool and the wise man. So, many times we're thinking that technology is so advanced. It's not that God is behind, it's that we're behind. And so what happens is when we fail to be imaginative and creative enough to utilize the ideas that God has given us. So when we're outside of the box, and when you're in what we consider the quote unquote church, just because it doesn't go well with us, like we think, well, that's not kind of how we do it. Well, those are some of the 6 most detrimental words to any ministry on the planet. We don't do it like that here. That'll kill any church and it'll kill any ministry. And the reason why young people like you guys are so valuable and you're so important is because you have to carry the church forward. And you have to carry the church forward with your ideas and with your practices. And what happens is, older folks like myself and others a little older than me, sometimes we don't like to give up the microphone and we don't like to get out of the way because we're wondering, like those who came before us, where's our place? And everybody wants a sense of belonging. And when, I'm not standing in the platform and I'm not behind the pulpit, where do I belong? And now I get a fear. So what happens is I hang on longer than I should instead of being able, like that relay runner, to pass the baton. My desire and dream, not just for you, but for all you guys, is that all of you should be leading in your local churches. And you should all be in positions of leadership in your particular communities. And that's how the church keeps moving forward. Because Jesus can work just as well in the 100-year-old as he can in the 14-year-old.
Right. And I do feel like that is a great point. I do feel that not an issue, but a common occurrence that we can see with a lot of our leaders is that they wait until they give everything that they have to the movement or to their particular cause until they retire. And then at that point, when the next generation is needing our ancestors or our leaders as mentors, now we have people who are just coming into a position and trying to take on and put in their own ideas into a system where they could just have been mentored by the leaders that we already had in power. So I feel like passing the baton at an earlier stage, not to say that there should be not a cap on like requirements of age limits in leadership positions, but I feel like we should take it upon ourselves to realize at a point it is upon the next generation to move forward. I will use my services, my knowledge to mentor the next generation. And I feel like you're saying, it does take a lot of self-awareness to realize that you're not stepping down, you're just stepping into another position of power. And it's just, you might not be at the forefront, but not everything powerful comes from the forefront. As we talked about on a pod before when we were discussing hidden figures in civil rights era, we talked about one of Dr. King's most powerful aides, who often didn't get any limelight.
Right.
He just spoke and wrote for King from the background. And it's just a lot of the most powerful things will come from those in the background, but the person in the forefront is always just going to get the attention. But we just need to restructure the way that we envision that. Keeping on track on what you were speaking on, more contemporary issues or more contemporary ideas on how the church affects or inflicts upon the Black community. Speaking at how the church was such a pivotal point in offering tutoring services and daycare services when you were growing up, and also just realizing how pivotal of a pillar the Black church was during the Civil Rights era. Do you think the church is still the same force that it was during that era in contemporary times? And if not, where does that divide come from?
No, I definitely don't. And you can see, because most of the time now, the church is a punchline or the church is a joke. And people often look at it like that. When we were marching in Sacramento after George Floyd, I remembered having a conversation with one of the leaders of one of the movements. And when I introduced myself as a pastor, she asked specifically, then why are you here? We don't need the church. And it was the first time, probably for me, in a long time, that I had felt that sentiment, that much visceral response to the church. But again, I think a lot of that is misinformation, because, you know, when you make a point about we don't need a bunch of well-suited Black men marching arm in arm, that's a fallacy. Because even when you go back to the civil rights movement, that might have been the picture that you saw, but the movement was so much more than that. And there were so many women that were engaged in that. And there were so many other people. You just talked about it, people behind the scenes. But we see 2 or 3 pictures and we conduct a complete narrative. And then we take that and we run with that. And unfortunately, you know, we haven't done our part either, because, you know, we've had a lot of failings in a lot of areas to, you know, substantiate that. So that's part of the problem. It again, you know, there's several layers to it. And nowadays, you know, we used to be able to mentor people, and not everyone now wants to be mentored. People think they can figure it out on their own. And so what happens is you have a fence up, and people are so quick to take the fence down before they even ask, why is it there? And when you take the time to ask, why is that fence there? Then maybe you learn something. You know, Kamen mentioned, you know, I coach basketball as well, and the great John Wooden said, it's after you know everything that you begin to learn. And that's what I teach my players, and that's what I, you know, unfortunately have to share with young people sometimes, because they do think they know everything. And none of us are at that place yet. Even the great Apostle Paul in the Bible said, I've not yet attained. And he's the central figure of the entire New Testament other than Christ himself. And he says, I haven't even attained yet. Like, I don't even know everything. And I've written 13 books in the New Testament. And yet here we are with a concept or an ideology that we know everything. And we fall so short. And instead of gathering as much as we can, we tend to eliminate based on how I feel about it. So, yeah, the church has fallen short. There's things we can do, but it does. It takes all of us together. It really does.
And not to rope us back into my favorite topic, which is power structures, but off camera we did talk about how it should be common sense, but people do like to say common sense is not common. But we understand that slavery and systemic racism has played a tremendous part in restructuring maybe how Christianity is taught or understood, but also just looking at maybe understanding the youth and how some people don't want to mentor because they feel they are able to learn and structure themselves by themselves. Do you feel just like the idea of how American society is in itself, how, bootstrap politics, pull yourself up, you get the work done by yourself, you just grind hard and focus on a singular goal. Do you think that plays any role in how people want to be involved in the church? Because we understand the church is more family-based. It's structured in the sense of we help those around us. We understand that we need help from those around us. But if people don't want help, how do you get them involved in church?
Well, you made a comment about, again, one of my favorite statements from Dr. King, when you say pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But Dr. King says the Negro has no boots. So how do you pull yourself up? So it takes all of us. And that means it takes white people, and it takes black people, and it takes Hispanic people, and it takes Asian people. God loves diversity. Otherwise, he would have made us all one color. But he didn't. And he's gifted and given us abilities and talents through every ethnic race. So, when you say that, where slavery, systemic racism, implicit bias is a real thing. I talk about it all the time. I was fortunate to be a police officer for years. And, for people to say they don't hold biases, that's not true. I've been in the back of a SWAT van, and I've heard them use racial epithets before and talking about who they want to kill and who they want to hunt. I've been there. I've been pulled out of a car before with a gun put to my head, and then a person saw my badge on my belt. So those things are real. And those are real challenges that we have to face, and we don't duck them and we don't dodge them, and the church shouldn't either. And so, those are issues that we have to face head on and that we have to deal with, but they do come into play because, we're in a society. We live in a world that's built on that. We live in a world that's built on the blood. You go into my office and you look, and I have a picture right above my window right there. On their shoulders we stand. I'm fortunate to be old enough to have a great-grandmother that was born into slavery. And when we had family reunions young, the Culpeper Plantation in Virginia, we had opportunities to sit at her feet and hear these stories and rub the welts on her arms and her back. So we know this is real. It's not something that we make up, and it's not something that we're trying to play so that we can get a penny. Because I believe that most brothers and sisters in our society do what they can to make it, and they work hard and they're diligent. I know too many single mothers that are raising children that are working 3 and 4 jobs and doing everything they can and scrubbing floors to do what they can to take care of their families. So, we are working hard, but these are the realities in which we live, and we're born at this time for this reason, and I believe that we're all world changers, just like what you guys are doing now, and you're born to make an impact, and you're born to make a difference. I just believe that platform should be from the church because it's a fountain that won't run dry, and Jesus is our source, and everything else will leave us wanting except him. And so when we're trying to fulfill all these other areas in any other way, we're going to always come up short.
Describe to me what you believe the phrase church hurt means. I know it can be in many cases, but I remember doing a youth conference earlier last year, and a big thing was on church hurt, and millennials and Gen Zs are the ones that are really being church hurt. But a lot of things that they were saying was kind of just the misconceptions of what people believe. Oh, the church is this, the church is that. It's like just misconceptions, really, that I personally believe, because like you said, I've seen what we did in American Canyon and in Napa, how diverse that part was. So when I hear certain church leaders telling me that diversity is, you remember when we went to the,
oh yeah,
and he said diversity is a
very interesting points of that.
He said diversity is a option. It's not it's something that God provides. It's not something that can just happen like that. So I that kind of really confused me too.
Basically,
but
like you said, an option.
Yeah.
Basically.
What do you think about church hurt and just diversity in church?
Well, that's a big one. But church hurt can happen I'm anywhere. People are sensitive. People have trauma. Trauma leaves deep wounds. One of the probably one of the advantages to trauma and being triggered is it shows you the areas in your life you need to work on. So if somebody does something to me, says something to me, and it triggers me, then I need to put that on the altar. And I need to say, Lord, I need help in this area. But church hurt is real because, people get hurt in so many different areas of life. But let me go back to a time when I was like y'all's age, okay? So 25 years old, I had nightclub hurt too. But it didn't keep me from going back to the club, okay? Sister threw a drink in my face. I was back on the next night, paid my cover charge, and I was back at the club. So see, we can determine what we want to keep us away from what we want to stay away from. I was hurt, the first time I shared with you. I was cut from, my first tryout with the Warriors. And I was hurt, and I said, I'll never play basketball again. Well, the next year, guess what? I was right there again. I'm going to make it this time. Well, I didn't make it that time either, and then God blessed me with a job. And so I gave up that dream. But I'm still coaching some 30-some-odd years later. So even though I was hurt, it didn't drive me away. And I think that we can utilize that. I'm not saying for everybody. I would never give a blanket statement because some people can be hurt, and there are toxic churches. There are environments in which people are manipulating and molesting and, doing all kind of stuff that, people need to run from as far as they can. But there are some amazing churches out there, and there are some people who are doing some tremendous work out there. So, you get hurt. Yes, there's a time you got to get back up on that horse. And you got to ride back in. And it takes courage and it takes a boldness to say, you know what, I'm going to give this another shot. And God loves us enough that if you keep doing it, he'll send you to the right place and surround you with the right people. When we came here to this church, it was predominantly a European church. And a lot of things were done and a lot of things were said that people who weren't acclimated to being around blacks, maybe those were some of the jokes they told around water coolers at work. Those were some of the things they said to their friends at home. And so those things hurt. But you know what? We laid it before the Lord, and our tears are on the altar in there. And then God has blessed us. And now we have some tremendous relationships here. We have some great friends here. And we've seen others like us come here because of that. So when you start talking about diversity, we have to look at it through the eyes of God. That's what I said before. If God didn't like diversity, he would have made us all one color, one size, one length, all of it. There would be no big, tall, short, wide, none of that. We'd all be the same prototype. But God decided that he loved diversity. And so our desire, if we have a heart after God, is to love diversity. And so we find the similarities with each other. We don't hunt for the things that divide us and separate us. Let's search for the things that draw us together, and let's work with that.
Our similarities is going to be the focal point of what will first bring us together. Right. We can discuss our differences after we have that foundation first, but a lot of people will use their differences to kind of eliminate that conversation altogether, and then you will never know. Maybe you have more in common than you do with that one difference. Let me
interject because a thought just came. Two thoughts. So number one, on the police department. So I was on the police department in the mid 80s, all the way into the late 90s. Okay. And so it was pretty raw. But you know what? I probably learned more about teamwork and brotherhood than I had any other area in my life. And I could see guys using the N-word, talking to people on the street, but they would lay their life down for me because I wore blue and I had a badge. And they taught me that. And they taught me that I'm not them, we're this. And so we had these big teams, okay? So that's number one. And then the second thing, I was talking to a friend of mine that I grew up with who had recently been in an alcohol rehab. And I was talking to her about some of the challenges that she was facing. And she said, you know what? I had fought rehab probably for about 20 years. And I finally decided after I lost my job to go to rehab. And she said, in rehab, I met lawyers and doctors and judges. People that I never would have met in my regular life outside of rehab. But see, when you have one common thread, all trying to get sober, you build relationship. So it no longer matters that I'm a judge and you're a janitor. What matters is we got the same struggle. And that's what it is when we start talking about our coming together and our unity in our community, is because we have one common struggle. And for us, the church, the common struggle is sin nature of the human being. And that's what draws us all together, that we're all broken, we all have chinks in our armor, and we have one Savior, which is Christ. And when we gather behind that and we rally with that, then brother, I got no more time to look at what you got going on. And little sister, I got no more time to point out what you ain't doing, because I got my own stuff that I'm trying to work out. You see what I'm saying? So when the sister's telling me that, hey, I'm in rehab, I'm not worried about what's going on out there right now. I'm worried about how can I get sober and how can I stay sober. And that's what the judge is saying. So now the judge is getting out. He's not just talking to judges. Now all of a sudden he's calling the little janitor girl. Hey, what you doing today? Right? How you working out your sobriety? See, it builds relationships outside of what our expectation is supposed to be based upon our social status. We base everything, based upon, what you drive. When I was running my business and we finally hit the big time, couple hundred employees, and Cayman was in probably middle school at that time. And I used to go give a lot of talks, and I learned early when I used to go give talks, and number one thing they would always say is, how much money you make? And then I'd go over that, and then they'd say, well, what kind of car you drive? And at that time we had two Benzes. I had a Benz wagon, had a drop top Benz, and then where do you live? And so what ended up happening, I used to go do these talks, and I'd have a little backpack, and I'd take out bands of thousands, and I'd put them down on the table. Boom, 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 boom. And I'd probably have 10 grand laid out on the table. And I'd say, now that I got your attention. And so, see, now everybody can focus because we're talking about materialistic stuff.
Right.
That matters to everyone. But guess what? Money gets wings. And we know that. Cayman knows that. Lived high on the hog for a long time, But if your foundation is in that money, then you'll be jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. But if your foundation for us in the church is Christ, then I know that money comes and I know that money goes, and that God can get me money anytime, in any place, anywhere that I need it. And that'd be a whole nother podcast about the amount of money that God has put in my hands over my lifetime, which is probably hundreds of millions of dollars.
Blam, need that. That's a great point. I feel like a lot of our emotional just energy goes towards things that tend to fleet. We don't focus primarily on what is cemented, things that we know are always going to be around because we think those are always going to be around. People like to say, not to go to another common saying, but you never know what you have until it's gone. But why not resonate with what you have? You can always focus on things that will come and go. Money will always come and go, but the only thing that brings us together is something that could be gone the next day. If we don't have that basic foundation, what is going to keep us together? Money is evil at the end of the day. There's a lot of good things that can come from having money, but if the only thing we have in common as a people is the want for money, then when we don't have that money, when we live in such a competitive society, we are always going to be butting heads more than we are coming together. In my opinion. I would still like a bag, though.
Yeah, that's
just
what I'm
couldn't
saying.
Blam was
agree.
still-
I couldn't
Blam
agree.
was
You say
still
you
like a
still like
bag.
that bag, though. I don't
definitely
know.
still
Money
like a
is evil.
bag.
I think that
I
people.
couldn't
I just
agree.
think people's.
Oh, you think people are evil?
Yeah, I mean, it's
I don't
just
think
greed.
people are naturally
I mean,
evil.
but who made the money?
I don't think people are naturally
People, so
evil.
I don't think people are naturally.
I don't think people are born evil.
I don't think
that
they're
at all.
naturally are born evil. I
I
just
do.
think that people
Really?
have certain.
Well, not evil.
Things going on.
I think
I
people are
don't.
born selfish.
I don't
And
think so either.
depending on your community, we can turn that selflessness into that selfishness into selflessness, or that selfishness is what is going to keep driving you throughout your life. And I feel like that is when it becomes a negative thing. So people, I think we are selfish because to survive, you have to be selfish. You have to know what you need to keep going. But like we were saying, community is such a big part of the black community. Just to speak for us, community is such a big part. It should be a big part of the black community. When we don't have the people in your community telling you, like, hey, you need to calm down a little bit, or needing to learn that you need to share resources, share energy and time, selfishness can definitely be a negative reality.
Well, there's a challenge that, again, because we have a Western perspective. And so everything in America is going to push us that way, because the more we see, the more we want.
Right.
And the more we want, the more we, it doesn't matter. Like, I told you, when I was rolling those Benzes, people used to always make comments, and I say that, you know what, there's a dealership right in Walnut Creek. You can go get you one of these today, too. And you just paid a note. Like, anybody can have whatever you want, but that's the push. But, Dr. Silvateria down at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena wrote a book called Buried Seeds. And what it is, she spent probably about 5, 6, or 7 years with some of the poorest populations on the planet. And she lived in these communities. And she would say that as people moved into these areas, they would find themselves living amongst these people. All the people had to sleep on was cardboard. But as soon as a new person came into the community, they would split their cardboard and say, here, so you have something to lay on. So, again, we view a lot of stuff through our American lens. It's not like that all over the world. Now, yeah, a lot of our influence has permeated. I have friends who are missionaries in some of the most desperate parts of the world, and mess around and let a church get a keyboard. Well, now you got people walking 25 miles to go see that new keyboard when they were happy with their sticks and stones and stumps. So, the American influence all over the world is being felt. But yes, there are people that are out there that are generous and kind and compassionate and care nothing about themselves and care everything about their neighbor. And, that's Christ's theology, and that's the church's position in which we stand. Now, again, we're broken and we're fallen people and we fall short in that area, but that's what we strive for. And we strive to be selfless, and that's a daily discipline in our lives. Let it not be about me. Let it always be about someone else. And, as the only parent, I hope, sitting at this table, praise the Lord.
Right.
Yeah, all right. As the only parent sitting at this table, that's the trajectory you take with your children. I recall, of course, Cayman's older sister, when I was building a business, she had to ride with me in my little truck. And as I would go around to different sites, she would be sleeping because I had no one to take care of her. And she'd be sleeping in a blanket, and I'd go check a site and run back and check on her. And then, after, Cayman was born and things started to settle down a little bit, I began to notice that it wasn't about the grind anymore. Like I used to always say, well, the more money I can make, it's generational wealth. This is for my kids. But one thing that I noticed is, well, my kids never saw me. And if I wasn't at my daughter's basketball game in Los Angeles, which I would drive to, so if I knew she was playing a game at 3 o'clock, at 6 o'clock in the morning, I was on the road. So I could drive to LA and see her play basketball. And then when Cayman started playing, you know, I made sure that I was there at his games. I made sure that I was coaching his team. You know, and those were just the things that finances afforded me. But it was just a resource, and it was just a tool. And Cayman can probably tell you that, you know, I probably use more of that finance on other people than on ourselves. But you know what? It's a lesson that you learn.
Yeah.
And you say, God, you give it to me again, I'll do a little different this time. So we'll see.
I mean, that's another gem. Your daddy just out here dropping gems. But that is also another, you know who else said a similar point to that? It's a rapper. I'll let you get one guess.
Tupac.
Kind of close, 21 Savage. So, he was on Club Shay Shay, you know, Shannon Sharp.
Yes.
He has a podcast as well. And he was on there talking similar to what you said, that we always view money as what is going to allow us to live our best lives with our family, but money is just a resource to have what we need to live. He felt, his words, he felt that broke parents are always going to be better than rich parents because money is just going to be something you can give your child, but what they really need is your time. The more money you make, typically the less time you have to spend with your family. So I agree with you. Time is always going to be more essential, but we still do need money to do the things that we would like to with our family, of course.
Of course.
Especially
of course.
in California. That's crazy to say.
And you want to give your, you know, your family, your kids, you want to give them experiences. You want them, you know, probably when you guys came in, he was driving a CLK 430 convertible to high school. And people used to tell me all the time.
Yeah.
And they'd say, why would you give your son that car? We didn't grow up driving that car. Well, I grew up driving a 1973 Plymouth Duster. And I pulled that car out of a cornfield of our neighbors. And my dad would make me every day after school go to the garage and bondo it and paint it and repair it. And I drove that car. And why should my son, if I have the means and the ability, have to drive a 1973 Plymouth Duster? And, you know, earlier you talked about, you know, slavery and systemic racism and implicit bias. Other people don't start off like that.
Right.
So why shouldn't we be able to start our children off? Instead, we want our children to go out and get 5 credit cards and get in debt and then take a school loan. And by the time they're 25 years old, they got $150,000 in debt that they'll never get out of. And you want to continue to dig ourselves a deeper hole as an ethnicity, well, then we keep on doing that. You know, I'm not going to say it's the sole reason that Magic Johnson divested his interest in those payday loan companies, but he got a lot of pushback on that. When you're going to cash your paycheck and they get 50% of it, and he was investing in that in the black community, he divested his interest in that. Because if we can give our young people a better foot up than we had, then we should do all we can to do that.
I agree.
And not just my own son, but I should be able to do that for other young people. When I watch people, you know, pay off these student loans and things like that, my prayer is not to have my loans paid off. My prayer is to be the person that can pay off other people's loans. We want to be those people that give young people of color the opportunities and advantages that they need here in the land called America.
How did your faith never waver in times of hardships in your life?
Well, I won't say that it did not waver. Again, to me, the beauty of the church is the community, because I have brothers and sisters next to me and beside me that, you know, your godfather being one of them, resting in the arms of Jesus now, but that I could cry to, and, you know, that I could, you know, would urge me to hold on. You know, we saw the fruits of the business, but yes, I had a car repossessed. Yes, the house went into foreclosure. Yes, we ate rice and beans for many days. Yes, I fasted a lot, not because I was spiritual, but because we didn't have no money. So, you know, those things happen. It's part of what we call perseverance. And, it's the faith because God made me a promise. And other people may let you down on their promises, but I have found in my years of living that God has been so faithful over all the things that he has promised me. And I'm not going to get to this age in my life now and now begin to wonder, is it still true? Because first of all, what's on the other side? Like, I'm talking to a friend of mine and he asked that question, what if it's not true? And I go, what have I wasted in my life? I've been nice to people. I've been generous. I've been kind. Why is that a waste of a life? So even if that wasn't the case, which I know is an absolute fallacy, but if it wasn't, what have I wasted? Mm-hmm. I've persevered. God has blessed me throughout life. My kids are blessed. You're doing well. Your sister's doing well. So what? God's been too good to now say maybe this is some other kind of stuff. No, I've seen the word over and over and over. I'll tell you one story when you say, how does your faith not waver? So before you, and I had your sister, and I remember one day she just wanted a donut. It was a Saturday morning, and she said, I just want a donut. And I was so broke, and I couldn't even get a donut. And at those times, they were probably like 28, 32 cents, something like that. I don't know if you remember that little donut shop down the street from where we lived. Mm-hmm. And I pulled all the cushions out of my couches and my sofa, all of that. And I found about 40-something cents in change. And so when we came out of the house, there was this little dog sitting on the front porch, little like a poodle. And she wanted to run and grab the little poodle. And I said, leave that dog alone. It might bite you. It might nip at you. And we went down to the donut shop. And on the donut shop window, there was a sign that said, reward lost dog. And it looked just like that dog that was sitting on my porch. And boy, I bought that cookie, that donut so fast and peeled rubber back to the house. And that little dog was still sitting right there. And I called the number, and an old lady came, and she pulled up, and that dog had been missing for 3 days. Wow. And she was so ecstatic. And I took the reward money that she gave me, and I bought groceries for almost 30 days. Wow. So when you say, how do you hold on? God is faithful. He always provides. When you think you have no other way, God comes through. And I'll tell you one more story is that, that's a little blessing. So, that we used to do the security for the third largest grocer in America. I'm not going to mention their name on air. You can Google it if you want to. Third largest grocer in America. And so the way that came to be is because the musician that played at our church at that time was working in a store, but he couldn't get back and forth to this house because he didn't have a car. And so the Lord moved upon my heart to buy him a car. And I found him a beautiful car with very limited miles. And I had made up in my own mind that I was going to sell him that car. And then he could just pay me like $100 a month, something very, very simple. But he'd be able to drive back and forth to see his family. And so I called up my friend, your uncle, and I called him up and I said, hey, ride with me down here to drop this car off. And so we rolled down to city of Richmond, and we went to his work location, and he was working. And we walked in, and he saw both of us, and he said, elders. And we said, hey, man, just lift your hands and start praising the Lord. God's got a blessing for you. And sure enough, he did. He stepped away from his register, and he started praising the Lord. And I said, brother, get somebody to come relieve you. We got a blessing for you. And he did, and we went outside. And by the time we got from inside to outside, God had already moved on my heart and said, don't sell it, give it to him. And I said, wow, Lord, I spent quite a bit of money on this car. I don't know if I want to give it to him. And God said, give it to him, and I'm going to be obedient to the Lord. The Lord's been too good. And so we go out, and I pulled those keys out of my pocket, and I said, brother, God wants to bless you with this car. And he just started crying, and we just start praising the Lord. And then the manager came out, and, so we took off across the street. And we're sitting at a Wendy's over there, and my phone rings, and it's the manager from the store. And he says, the brother just told me what you just did for him. And he said, he told me you own a security company. And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, it sounds like the kind of security company we need. And he said, our regional manager is in the area. Can you hang out for about 30 minutes?
Wow.
From that day, 4 weeks later, I had a check for $250,000 in my hand. And I had one of the largest contracts with the third largest grocer in America.
Wow.
So when people begin to tell me about faith in God, and I'm not saying that all our faith is financial, because I've had so much peace, you already know this, in turbulent times in my life, to lose my dad, to find out my mom had Alzheimer's, and then came in nose to go through a divorce all at the same time, all within 14 months. I probably had a nervous breakdown at the time, but I was still operating as a chaplain. I was still in every prison in California. I was still preaching every Sunday, and I was still working in the midst of all of that. So it's not just financial. God will sustain you in some of your darkest moments. And when he says he is the lily of the valley, trust me, I've been in that valley. And I've had some very dark days and nights, but God has always been with me, and he's brought me through. So
I'm also glad that you brought that up too. So as a pastor and as a father, a coach, you wear many hats. You got a hat on right now. LCC, wear many hats. But what does self-care look like in Christianity? Because it's hard to pour from an empty vessel. So how do you make sure you have something to give to other people?
Well, that's a great point, because what I just mentioned to you, probably prior to that, and my son knows, it would have took a lot to walk away from pastoring a church. My father's death was devastating. It was sudden. It was unexpected. I was at home. Cayman was with me, and I got that call from my brother, and I was probably in a fetal position. We had white carpet in the house at that time, and my nose was streaming blood. And that's what it took to get me out of the pulpit. And I went to New York and stayed there for a number of months, turned my business over to my administrator. And my brother came back and then ran it while I stayed in New York, and turned the church over to another Hispanic pastor while I stayed in New York. And so self-care became very important during that time. And it's nothing now, because last year was my wife's 50th birthday, and her birthday happened to come on Easter last year. And when I told people that I was taking my wife to Hawaii to celebrate her 50th birthday, they said, but you're a pastor. It's Easter. How can you be away from your church on Easter? Because it's my wife's birthday. So I understood at that time, after my dad's passing, that my number one ministry was to my mother. And, that was a very difficult time for us. We didn't know anything about Alzheimer's. I probably know more now than I would care to know, and I would not wish that on my worst enemy, to have a parent or a loved one with Alzheimer's. But that taught me that minister to my mom for those years that we have her. And I left my business, I left the church, and I went on IHSS, and I took care of my mom until she died. So we went from having a very good income to living off social services, so that I could be home every day taking care of my mother. And so self-care now is simple, because this church is going to keep going whether I'm here or not. And they'll say, God bless you, we had a great pastor, and they'll keep on moving. The police department, last I looked, they're still doing fine. They still arresting people and writing tickets since I left there. So I understand that, yes, I may be important in certain areas of my life, but I don't sustain anything. And so if I'm not taking care of myself on the golf course, spending time, with people I care about, fitness, I love exercise and I love working out and running and biking. And, we miss those hills in Benicia. We talk about them all the time, man. How we miss those workouts right there, the stadiums and all of that. We miss all of that. But that's self-care. And I would pray that for not just young people, but older people as well. I know a lot of people who are burnt out or close to it. But, folks going to, they'll sprinkle ashes on your box and they'll keep it moving.
What feeling do you get from coaching? What does that fulfill you? Does it what does it give you?
Man, I just first of all, I just enjoy competition. I'm a very
the ultimate competitor right here.
Person, you know that.
Yes.
I was 4 weeks out of hip replacement surgery when I was giving you buckets out there in our blacktop wars. Put my walker to the side and gave you buckets after hip replacement surgery. So I'm competitive, and so that's one area. The police department filled a lot of that adrenaline, and you're competing every day, not just trying to stay alive, but you got bad guys out there trying to do stuff, and you're trying to outwit them or whatever to try to keep people safe. So you already have that. So your blood already flows for that. You love pursuits. You love chasing people and all of that. Well, when that was taken, it became business. And then the competitiveness was building a great business and making millions and millions of dollars. And then after that, of course, ministry. But coaching, because I run a little people's league here. So I have first grade through seventh grade. Aww. And that's all nice. And that's, you love the hugs from the little,
kids.
Oh, yeah.
I thought you meant little.
I thought even at first, then he said 1 to 7th grade.
I'm about to catch a game.
Yeah. But I got little humans here, and that's just fun. But coaching in college is competitive, and we're playing for something. And, there's an ultimate pursuit, and there's things that you didn't achieve. I didn't win a high school championship that I always wanted, and I wanted to play in Arco, and so when Arco was torn down, and then of course I wasn't in high school, so I didn't get a chance at Golden One, and so I wanted to win a state championship at junior college level, and winning a conference championship, the first ever. There's no feeling like that, cutting down nets and having confetti and all of that. That was amazing. But the state championship is still, so it's still in play, and if I get the opportunity to go back and do it again, then that's what we build for, you like winning games, but the ultimate chip, man, is at the end when you're hoisting that state trophy. And that's what we train for. It's what I try to keep my mind for. And it keeps me around folks like y'all, man. It's like there's nothing like being around 19, 20, 22-year-olds, man, who, just think they, got it all together, and they fall short in so many areas.
I thought you were talking about strictly athletics. I was like, I might be 20 in my 20s, but my body old. My knees hurt just sitting down. I had to go. I was telling Cayman I went to do an ice plunge yesterday. That was tough.
Oh, man.
Very tough.
Yeah.
But it definitely worked for sure. My legs.
Oh, yeah.
My knees feel a lot better.
Oh, yeah.
I might have to go tomorrow.
Yeah. Get those ice buckets, man. We get an ice tub out here. My wife and I, when we're running in the summer, we got an ice tub in the back of the house. And when we run and work out in the summertime, and then we fill up that ice tub, man, and then we take those ice baths, nothing better for your body than that. So,
let's wrap it up. I want to really appreciate you for coming. What I will say, as I do get older, as things start getting a little harder, just in life, you go do different things. I will say that my faith and what I believe in and what you guys have instilled in me, both you and my mom, I really appreciate it, because it's literally my foundation. Anytime I'm really to the point where I feel like I'm hitting rock bottom. I don't even know what rock bottom is, but I feel like it. I just know that I have God in my back pocket that will always be there to provide for me. So I really just want to thank you for instilling in that me from a young age. I always know. I know that I have the confidence to do anything because God is with me. So thank you.
And you used to text me from school and say, this English teacher is saying this about Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Or this one. And I would say, Cayman, you got to learn how to stand on your own.
Right.
You can't ride on your daddy's faith. You got to ride on your own. But my prayer for all three of you, you all need to be in leadership positions in a church. You all need to be. If you all lived in Modesto, you would be on my leadership board here at this church, because we need your voice, we need your value, and we need your insight. And I would pray that anywhere you go, you ask those questions, and if they don't have space for you, then you go somewhere else. Because there's churches out there in your communities and areas that want you and that need you. And you guys ever relocate to Modesto, you have not just a seat at the table, but you have a tremendous voice at the table. You're gifted, you're talented, you have some great abilities, and the church is greatly lacking when you're not in it and when you're not involved. Not just sitting in a seat, consuming a sermon, but you need to be making decisions.
Amen. All right, the Rising Podcast, Pastor Welch, peace.